Okay, cool. Okay, so today I hopped on this morning to talk to everybody a little bit about House Joint Resolution 51, which I'm calling the Abolition Bill. My name is Savannah. I'm the co-founder for the Coalition to Abolish Slavery in Texas, and I'm also the co-director of state operations for the Abolish Slavery National Network. So when we talk about slavery, especially with House Joint Resolution 51, you know, everybody always says, well, slavery was already abolished, right? The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. However, even if you're not a history buff, we all learned in school that the 13th Amendment pretty much says, as it reads here, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for a crime, whereas the party shall be duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their own jurisdiction. So in essence, slavery was abolished unless you were convicted of a crime. So that is essentially why we're saying, yes, the 13th Amendment did abolish slavery for most people, but not everyone. And that's what we're trying to do. So I tried to lay out a little bit of the history here because it's hard for me to chronologically put dates in order, but it also helps when we're trying to understand, you know, how all this came to play. We know that the United States has a 400 plus year history of slavery historically. So it's hard for people to put into context what modern day slavery looks like. So just a brief review about slavery and the abolition of slavery, right? We know in 1863, President Lincoln, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which did, after the Civil War ended, was supposed to free slaves, but he also knew that the proclamation was not a law and that this proclamation would have to be followed up with some type of law in order for people to even think about actually ending slavery. We know in the state of Texas that we're a little bit late to the party sometimes, so we didn't hear about the Emancipation Proclamation until June 19, 1865. And this is where the holiday Juneteenth comes in. When you hear Juneteenth, Juneteenth is June 19th. So June 19, 1865 is when Gordon Granger went down to Galveston and told everybody, hey, the Civil War ended. And then so thus slavery was ended. The 13th Amendment was not actually ratified until 1865. And what that means is that, you know, the states validated that amendment. So there were 27, I believe, of 35 states that had to ratify the 13th Amendment in order for it to be so. And so on December 6, 1865, that happened. Again, Texas was late to the party, did not want to ratify the 13th Amendment, but they decided 5 years later that they were going to go ahead and validate the 13th Amendment. So the anniversary of that was actually February 18th of, it's 1870, y'all, sorry, typo, of 1870, which is when Texas actually ratified the 13th Amendment. But a couple of dates that I didn't really put in here, and just to put into context how prison slavery falls into it, right? So the government knew that once they ended slavery, they were gonna have to figure out how economically we could continue as a country to keep, you know, the forces working and to keep the economy going. So there's a lot of, I guess, I don't want to say misconception, but there's a little bit of different dates. But convict leasing, I looked at the Texas Historical Society and Association, and it says that convict leasing started in 1867, which is probably the most accurate date. And if you look at it, it was just a couple of years after America said, hey, everybody's free. But then in 1867, they said, but wait a minute, you know, they enacted these vagrancy laws and black codes in order to enslave people for things like, you know, being out on the street too long or not having a place to stay, which, I mean, if they were living on a plantation, essentially they wouldn't have a place to go. So in 1867, they started the first couple of leases were leased out to the railroad company to help build the railroads in Texas. And this is when the prisons really started booming. We had our first prison in Texas in 1849. So they didn't build the prisons per se to keep this going, but we know that the prisons started filling and overcrowding because of the beginning of the convict leasing process. So when we're looking at House Joint Resolution 51, I'll go into what the language looks like, but I really want people to understand how this is different from a traditional bill. So a House Joint Resolution, or this House Joint Resolution, is a change to the Constitution. So I wanted to talk about how we make a change to the Constitution in the state of Texas. So, of course, it has to be a regular convening at the legislature, and we are in our 87th legislative session, or they can call a special convening. So in this case, we didn't need a special convening because we were already in the session, which is why when we were looking at when to do it, it was just like the perfect time, because I actually just started this work toward the end of last year. So it was kind of like, you know, I did a kickoff in Fort Bend County. We had a rally for the 13th, and Becky, no, it wasn't Becky, but TPAA came out, and they had the mock sale. Rep. Ron Reynolds showed up, and he's actually the co-author of this bill. He showed up, as well as a bunch of other legislators. And it was a great kickoff to what is now this campaign to abolish slavery here in Texas. So what needs to happen in order for us to change the Constitution? So we are still waiting for a Senate companion bill. So the House Joint Resolution is the House bill, and we're still shopping and meeting with senators to see who may carry this bill, but we will have to get 2/3 of the vote in the House and the Senate in order for this to get out onto the ballot. So we have 150 members of the House and 31 members of the Senate, so we'll need 100 yes votes and 21 yes in the House and 21 yes votes in the Senate. It's a lofty goal, but I think we can do it. So, and then once we get those votes in each chamber, then it will go on to a ballot for a majority vote by everybody in the state of Texas. So majority vote, meaning, you know, majority. So it could be 70%, just depending on how many people are voting. So what is House Joint Resolution 51? So our sponsor is Representative Alma Allen, and co-sponsored Rep. Ron Reynolds. And before I go on, I just want everybody to understand, like, these bills are not easy to get sponsored. Like, people meet daily, weekly, sometimes twice a day to try to get these legislators to sponsor these bills. It's a big commitment because they have to have talking points. They have to know the messaging for these bills. And so a lot of it is, there's a huge education component. So if you are trying to get a bill pushed and you're fortunate enough to get a legislator to carry your bill, you should not only thank them, but encourage everyone else to follow up and thank them, because, you know, they're the ones that are going to be on the floor, you know, answering the questions and supporting. So we really need to do a better job, I think, of supporting our champions. I know Rep. Ron Reynolds has been a champion, and Dr. Alma Allen is always a champion for change. So if you have a legislator who is supporting a bill, carrying a bill, and it's something that you are compassionate about, make sure that you thank them. And even if they're not, if you support this bill, please write them and tell them thank you for sponsoring it. House Joint Resolution is a constitutional amendment. It would end slavery even as punishment for a crime in the state of Texas. And so what it looks like, so state constitutions vary, right? And in our constitution, we don't have language with regard to slavery. So in order to amend our constitution, we are actually inserting the language saying that we don't want slavery here, basically. And verbatim, what it's going to look like is in Article 1, Section 35 of our Constitution, if we are successful, it will read, "No person shall be held in slavery or involuntary servitude in the state for any reason, even as a punishment for a crime." And it's very simple. Basically, we're saying either you support slavery or you don't. Regardless if someone was convicted of a crime, regardless if someone is in prison, either you support locking people up and caging them and forcing them into labor and other circumstances, situations, or you don't, right? Sounds pretty simple, but you know, we know we're going to get opposition, and that's pretty much the way it is. Before I move on to the next bill, I wanted to encourage everybody to visit the Coalition to Abolish Slavery Slavery-Texas Facebook page. We also have a survey that's circulating, and the survey basically is it's a sample ballot question, and it's basically asking, are you for or are you against this amendment, constitutional amendment? And what I'm trying to do is use that to show the legislators that, hey, you know, you're in District 13 and you've got, you know, 50% or 100% of your people that are already supporting this legislation. So, you know, could you get on board? I didn't share it here, and I should have, but I'll share it on the page later on. Does anybody have any questions about it or comments before I move on? Okay. If not, I wanted to hit briefly on this House Bill 2331 that was filed by Representative Cortez on February 25th. This is something that us as the Statewide Leadership Council and TCJC have really been having conversations about really before the winter storm, but we all know, like, the harrowing stories, the horrible stories that we heard about stuff that was going on in the prisons during the winter storm really had everybody just, it tugged at my heartstrings, especially even though my loved one, their particular unit did not lose water or electricity. You know, the lack of response was a huge issue for me. So I support House Bill 2331, and it's basically related to governing declared natural disasters in TDCJ. And so what it is the two main components. They're going to be responsible for creating an advisory board and then an expedited parole release plan as part of an emergency response, which is something, like, as a nurse, that I always felt like should have been a responsibility of TDCJ to not only worry about the building, but the people in the building, right? Whether you're evacuating the people out of the prisons or not, there has to be some type of plan for what's going to happen. You know, if the lights turn off, like what happened, some people were out of lights, you know, without lights for 5 to 6 days. Some people were out of without water for 5 to 6 days, you know. So what are you going to do, right? So this advisory board is going to be created to provide the board with recommendations for the emergency response plan. They're going to have access to all relevant information and be able to make recommendations. And I love this part. They're going to have access to the units, right? How hard is it for us to get access to the unit? So they're going to have access to the unit, and they're going to be able to recommend specific criteria for the emergency response plan. I won't really go into the expedited parole release plan. There are specific requirements for that, but I just think it's great that it's being acknowledged that something needs to be done with regard to looking at who is eligible for release to go during these natural disasters. And I know Jorge's been doing a lot of work to help people who were delayed because they didn't have access to classes and courses and things like that. So I just think that this legislation couldn't have come at a better time. But when you're looking at the advisory board, I just want to highlight that, you know, of course, the executive director of TDCJ is going to be on it. There's going to be a commissioner of the Department of Health, 2 previously incarcerated individuals, 2 family members of someone who's currently incarcerated. There's going to be 1 person with a background in emergency planning, including someone who has previously created or been a part of the creation of an emergency plan, and then somebody who has a background in public health, which is important because, you know, we know a lot of times these disasters or these responses could be related to an infectious disease like COVID-19. So, you know, it's kind of like we had 2 disasters during this time at once. So I just wanted to highlight those things about that particular bill. You guys can pull it up and look at the language yourself, House Bill 2331. But I think that it's something that everybody should support, especially if you have a loved one in TDCJ and you know about the lack of transparency, right, and accountability. We need something like this. We need oversight, and I think this really is a key component of that. And the last thing I want to talk about was Parole Watch 2021. Just because April the 3rd, I'm having a rally at the Capitol in Austin. I am the outside coordinator for an organization called National Freedom Movement. It is a prison-led organization, so people on the inside come up with initiatives, and basically they tell us what they want us to do. So this particular initiative, Parole Watch, is we are encouraging on a federal level for the reinstatement of federal parole, and then also we want states and we want the federal entity to establish a mandatory parole criteria. So that's going to look different in each state. But at this rally, what we want to do is we want to provide a platform for the parole bills that are out there. It's going to be an awareness rally. We're going to have several speakers. I'm hoping Jorge will come out and support. Jorge. But if you want to get involved, go ahead and email me info@befightforjustice.org. I hope everybody is able to come out. It is in person. We will be social distancing. I have masks galore. I have hand sanitizer. So everybody's going to come out. We're all going to be safe and just rally, 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 and raise our voices. That's all I have this morning.
Savannah, that is amazing. Thank you.